What's going on, Alabama fans? This is James Ogletree with Tide 100.9. Just wanted to get on here and kind of give some of my thoughts and things I'll be watching for during Alabama's home opener against Texas A&M today. Number 2 Crimson Tide versus the number 13 Aggies. It's just nice to have football back in Tuscaloosa, isn't it? Seems like forever since I've been in Bryant-Denny Stadium in the press box, watching an Alabama game in person. I didn't get to go to the Mizzou game last week, just due to travel restrictions and all that. So very excited to get to cover today's game in person. We get to check out a new press box today. They moved the press box across to the opposite side of the stadium. We're a little bit in the corner now, so I'm curious to see how that view will be. But really just excited to get back in the stadium and cover some Alabama football in person and give you guys some great coverage at Tide109.com. Went out and bought some binoculars today to help me. I have a little bit of old man vision, so got some binoculars from a local sporting goods store, and hopefully that'll help me cover the game more accurately and really hone in on what's going on down there on the field. As far as what to watch for on the field, I have a couple things I want to watch for, but before we get into that, I just want to talk about Texas A&M versus the elite teams of college football. Now, when Jimbo Fisher was hired in 2018, it was, I feel like, widely viewed as a hire that would help Texas A&M become one of the elite programs in college football. The way they recruit, as much money is in that athletic department, it seemed like they just needed that coach who could get the elite talent there and could make the adjustments on the field, and they could be contending for national championships. And now, in the third year of the Jimbo Fisher era, that hasn't really happened. They haven't really competed with any of the the cream of the crop teams that they've played since Jimbo's been hired. I look at last year, they go 8-5, which, when you first look at that, you think, ooh, Texas A&M is supposed to be, one of the better teams in the SEC, and they go 8-5. But those 5 losses were all to teams ranked in the top 8 at the time. They lose to number 1 Clemson, number 1 Alabama, number 2 LSU, number 4 Georgia, and number 8 Auburn. Talk about a tough schedule. But when you look closer at those 5 games, they're really not competitive. And against the spread, A&M, let me double check here, make sure I get this right. A&M is 2-3 against the spread. So not only are they losing against these elite teams, they're underachieving. They're losing by even more than they're projected to lose by. So let me just go through these real quick here. Against number 1 Clemson, they were a 16-point underdog. They lost by 14. They led for just 3.5 minutes of that game, and they trailed 24-3 in the fourth quarter. A couple weeks later, they play number 8 Auburn. They're favored by 4. They lose by 8, and they never lead during the game. They trailed by as many as 18 in the fourth quarter. In College Station last year, they hosted number 1 Alabama. They were a 17-point underdog, lost by 19, led for just 4 minutes, trailed by as many as 27 in the fourth quarter in the eventual 47-28 win by Alabama. Later in the season, against number 4 Georgia, A&M was a 12-point underdog. They lost by 6. They never led, and they trailed 16-3 in the third quarter. You're noticing a trend here. They go down early, and they never recover. They don't have the firepower to play from behind. And then this one is where it got ugly. They played number 2 LSU, eventual 15-0 national champions. The Aggies were a 17.5-point underdog. They lost by 43 points, 50-7. Obviously never led in that one. They trailed 31-0 midway through the second quarter. If you're an Aggies fan or player or coach or staff member or booster or anyone else there in Aggie land, that's not what you want. You hired a national championship winning head coach to get you contending for championships. And you lose by 43 points to the national champions. These 5 teams that they played that were ranked in the top 8 last year, none of them were close. The Georgia game ended up being close, but really A&M was down by 2 scores for most of that game. And now this week, they go on the road against number 2 Alabama. It's the same story. And they're a 17 and a half, 18-point underdog, depending on where you're looking. I'm not saying that Jimbo's job should be on the line with a loss today or even really anytime soon. Because A&M is still a quality program. They're still recruiting like crazy. It's just tough recruiting in the SEC. This year, in the 2020 class, they were ranked number 6 in the country in the 24/7 composite ratings. But they were 4th in the SEC. It's just brutal out there, man. So anyway, A&M, I mean, this is just another opportunity for them to show that they can compete with an elite college football program. A rival in the SEC. Nick Saban and Jimbo Fisher obviously very familiar with each other. But, you know, they're 3-score underdogs. So we'll see if they can just take a step toward being one of those contending teams, or if they're just kind of destined to be always in that 8 to 15 range. And you know, we're always wondering if they're going to take that next step as a program. Moving on to some things I'm going to be looking for today on the field. One thing I think is really important is Alabama's offensive line and their protection, especially the right side. Emil Ekiyor, number 55, made his first career start at right guard last week against Missouri. It was a hit or miss game for him. You can see the power that he plays with in the run game. That was something that Coach Nick Saban has mentioned to us several times. And you can see that. You can see they like running behind him and Deontay Brown, especially those guys pulling to the left. They really like doing that. Did that several times against Missouri, and we could see that again today. But in pass protection, there's some room for improvement for Ekiyor. Both sacks that Bryce Young took late in that game against Missouri came from the right side, and Ekiyor, you know, I'm not an expert in blocking assignments or schemes, so I'm not going to assign blame, but when you go back and watch the film, there were some things that he could have done better. I mean, really, he's a redshirt sophomore. He's been in the program, but he's never started a game, and that Missouri front is not a pushover. They're solid. And same thing with the Aggies defensive front today. They've got some talented guys there. Bobby Brown was a preseason All-SEC second-team type player. He's 325 pounds. DeMarvin Leal, number 8 on their D-line, is a former 5-star. Last week against Vanderbilt, and I know it's Vanderbilt, so take it with a grain of salt, but the Aggies' 4 starting defensive linemen had 5 tackles for loss just between the 4 of them. So they can be disruptive up front, and that's something that Nick Saban and Najee Harris talked about earlier this week in their media availabilities. Also keep an eye on A&M freshman defensive lineman McKinley Jackson. If that name sounds familiar, it's because he was an Alabama target in this 2020 recruiting cycle. Ended up picking the Aggies. 335 pounds, big presence in the middle of that D-line. Had half a sack last week against the Commodores in his college football debut. Also keep an eye out for Damani Richardson, number 26, a safety for the Aggies. He was on the SEC All-Freshman team last year, had an interception of Tua Tagovailoa, if you remember, in the end zone last year in College Station, and had 7 tackles and an interception last week against Vandy. Najee Harris talked about how the Aggies like to use their safeties against the run, so look for Damani Richardson to maybe make some plays over the top against those Alabama receivers, or come down into the box and help out against the run as well. Moving on to things to look for the Alabama defense. Kellen Mond obviously has been around for like 14 years. This will be his 4th start against Alabama in his career. You know, a dual threat guy. We know the mobility that he brings to the game. I sent out a tweet a little bit earlier this morning about his rushing stats from his previous 3 starts against Alabama. If I can just rant for a little bit, it's so stupid that the NCAA includes sacks as a quarterback's rushing yardage. They're subtracted from a quarterback's rushing yardage. It makes no sense. A sack is a passing play. The offensive line is pass protecting. The quarterback is looking to throw. I do not understand why they count it against rushing yardage. Anyway, when you exclude sacks from Kellen Mond's games against Alabama over the last 3 years, he has, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, check it on my Twitter feed, but, you know, 2 of those games he had 10 or 11 carries for more than 100 yards and a touchdown. And then 2017 as a freshman, I think he had 10 carries for 40 yards. So his worst game, he's still pretty effective in moving the ball for a quarterback. And you can see, looking back at last year's game, how they wanted to get him involved early. The first play of the game in College Station last year was a quarterback draw by Kellen Mond. And they did that several more times throughout the game, just trying to keep, especially last year with Alabama's 2 freshman inside linebackers, just trying to keep them on their heels, keep them guessing, give them as much misdirection and deception and eye candy to look at as possible. Now, having Dylan Moses back is going to obviously help that a ton, just with the discipline that he plays with, his knowledge of the playbook, and his explosiveness as an athlete. That's going to help a lot. But Kellen Mond is still a dangerous athlete. Regardless of who's on the field, the Alabama defense, the Alabama front 6 are going to have to be disciplined in their reads. You can't get sucked in too far on the play action. A&M tosses some RPOs out there a little bit. So they're going to have to be disciplined there. As far as the passing game, it seems like every year we're talking about, is this the year that Kellen Mond really takes the next step as a passer? And we haven't really seen that yet. And with Jamon Osborne opting out, Kendrick Rogers moves on, Courtney Davis moves on, the receiving core for the Aggies is thinner than it's been in a while. Real quick, forgot to mention this a second ago. Kellen Mond and Dylan Moses were actually high school teammates at IMG Academy down there in Florida, so they're familiar with each other. I imagine we'll see Moses, maybe tracking Kellen Mond down. If Kellen's rolling to his left, rolling to his right, trying to find a man open downfield, I imagine we see Dylan Moses giving chase, and maybe those two get reacquainted. The 2 high school teammates get close again with a tackle from Dylan Moses on his former teammate Kellen Mond. But going back to the passing game, Jamon Osborne was also on that IMG team. That's what made me think of that. But now he's opted out. The Aggies' top 2 receivers last week were Caleb Chapman, number 81, who is 6'5", 190. He brings a lot of size outside. He almost has tight end size if he were a little heavier. And Jalen Preston, number 5, is 6'2". So they have good size out there, and I'm very eager to see how those 2, Chapman and Preston, match up with Alabama corners Patrick Surtain and Josh Jobe. We'll see if Mond has the trust to those guys to give him a chance outside and go up and get some 50-50 balls. One thing that Aggie fans were hoping to see more of last week in the season opener was true freshman receiver Demond Demas. He was a 5-star recruit, according to 24/7 Sports Composite, the number 3 overall receiver in the class. But he didn't play against Vanderbilt last week. Coach Jimbo Fisher said, he thinks his young freshman skill players are ready, including Demond Demas. But it was a close game, and he felt like Caleb Chapman, Jalen Preston, the Aggies' other skill players were doing okay. So he didn't need to make a change and give his freshmen some playing time. Demas, though, is a 6'3" freshman. So again, he adds to that size element that A&M has on the outside with Chapman at 6'5", Preston 6'2", Demas 6'3". I would imagine that we see him today against the Crimson Tide. I think with Alabama, a 17-point favorite, they're going to go up early in the game, I would imagine. And Jimbo's, I think, going to need a spark. They're going to need some big plays in the passing game. And Demond Demas can bring you that. He's an incredible athlete. Obviously, being a 5-star, the kind of athleticism and dynamic receiving ability that he brings. So I would imagine that we see Demond Demas, number 1, the freshman receiver, today in Bryant-Denny Stadium. Then you look at the Aggies' backfield as I wrap it up here. Isaiah Spiller returns from last year as a true freshman. He's a bigger guy, 6 foot, probably 220 pounds. But Anais Smith is the one that really intrigues me more. He was a wide receiver last year, changed jerseys, now he's number 0, and he's a running back. So if a guy makes the switch from wide receiver to running back, you know that he's probably not a bruising type. He's going to be a little bit twitchier, better receiver out of the backfield. And Nick Saban alluded to that this week. Having both of those guys, Anais Smith and Isaiah Spiller, in the backfield can present some problems for Alabama's defense. So I would imagine we see Jimbo scheme that up several times today. You have Spiller with that element of through the middle, kind of shedding arm tackles, 220 pounds, tougher to bring down. And then Ainias Smith is probably your better pass catching running back, having played wide receiver earlier in his career. Have him run a little flat route as a check down for Kellen Mond, or even something further down the field, maybe a wheel route. So having both of those guys, Ainias Smith number 0 and Isaiah Spiller number 28 in the backfield with Kellen Mond, could be a tough little formation for Alabama's defense. And last guy I wanted to touch on is Jalen Weidermeyer, number 85, A&M's tight end. He's a big guy, 6'5", 265 pounds. Just kind of has this rumbling kind of style to his game. He's tough to bring down. He'll run you over. And he had 2 touchdowns against Alabama last year. One was a busted coverage where 2 Alabama defenders went with a motioning receiver and left Weidermeyer wide open. But another one was just straight man-to-man coverage against Xavier McKinney. And Mond delivered an on-target throw in the end zone. And that was Weidermeyer, who was a freshman last year, his second touchdown of the game against Alabama. Weidermeyer was also on the all-freshman team last year, SEC all-freshman team, along with A&M safety Damani Richardson, who I mentioned earlier. And since Jimbo's been at A&M, the tight end has been a big part of the passing game. Weidermeyer was one of their better receivers last year. When I say better, I mean one of their more involved receivers in terms of targets, yards, touchdowns. And then the year before that, if you recall, Jay Sternberger was their leading receiver as well. He's now in the NFL with the Green Bay Packers. But since Jimbo's been in College Station, the tight end has been a big part of the passing game. So I'd expect Jalen Weidermeyer to get a decent amount of targets today. So those are my thoughts. Those are kind of my notes, things that I'll be looking at in this SEC West Showdown top 15 matchup. Number 2, Alabama. Number 13, Texas A&M. Looking forward to it. As always, keep an eye out for my coverage. We'll have a couple of other stories from our other great writers at Tide 100.9. So keep an eye out for that. I'll be live tweeting the game, and then check out Tide109.com after the game for some of our great coverage. Appreciate it, guys. Enjoy the game.